let's look at how we can type our programs in a compiler and test it using the questions that I have just done with you, and to ensure that it works in a programming environment. The programming environment that I'm using is Online GDB. It's a web-based programming environment. You can run multiple languages using this environment. I have selected Java, and it automatically gives me the main class, public class main, and it puts in the public static void main for me. So I'm going to create an array. This array will be an integer array, int square bracket, let's call it ARR. Let's call it ARR marks. So I'm working with marks equals new int, and the size of the array is going to be 5. We're going to be inputting 5 marks for 5 students. And remember, when we use the new keyword, it means that we are working with an object. So I've declared my array. There's nothing that has been input into the array at this stage. It's just having ARR marks that is allocating memory space at this stage. So I want to now write code to input the 5 test marks for the students. Okay, there are 5 students. They write a test, and I want to input the test marks for each of the 5 students. So the question we ask ourselves, do I want to store each test mark? The answer is obviously yes. I want to store it in my array that has 5 cells. So the rule is, if you want to go to each cell in the array, then I will make use of a for loop. So I've got int I equals 0, I less than ARR dot length, and then I'm going to say I plus plus. It's going to increment by 1 each time. So that's my loop, and the position I, the variable I, is going to take me to each position in the array. Let me request the user system.out.print. Let me request the user to enter the student's test mark. And I am then going to input the mark into my array. So ARR mark takes on the value equals, and I want to make use of the next int method. Now the next int method is contained in a class called scanner. So for me to make use of next int, I need the scanner class to be in place. So I'm creating an object called KB. Scanner KB equals new scanner system.in. System.in is used for input. The way we use system.out, that is used for output. So I want to use the nextInt method, therefore I need the class scanner. However, whenever I use the class scanner, I need to import the package. So I need to say import java.util.star. That means this particular class scanner is contained in the package util. So we have to import that package in order to use scanner. Now that I've got KB, the object KB declared, and I can use the scanner class, I am now in a position to say KB dot, and I can use the method next. next int. And that will allow me to do the input. So this is the routine that I would use to be able to input my 5 test marks. For testing purposes, I always like to write the input and the output at the same time to ensure that it works. So let's now output the test marks. Again, I ask myself the question, do I want to go to each cell in the array? And the answer is yes, because in order to output, I need to go to each cell in the array. Therefore, I'm going to use a for loop, int I equals 0, I less than arr marks dot length, and then I'm going to say I plus plus. And to display, it's just simply system.out.print, and I'm going to print arr marks, square bracket I, semicolon, and print is going to keep the cursor on the same line. So after each mark, I want to leave a space. So let's leave a space. And once it's finished, I'm going to say system.out.print line. I'm not printing anything. All that statement is going to do is to move the cursor. I want to move the cursor onto the next line. After the loop finishes, the printing would have, onto the next line. The printing would have been completed, right? After this loop is finished, the printing would have been completed. So all I'm doing is advancing the cursor onto the next line. Let's do a run at this stage. I want to pick up any errors that I may have and then correct them. And there it picks up an error, int I equals 0, I less than arr. It should be arr marks. That's the name of the array, so I'm correcting that. Let's give that a run now and see it's picked up another error, variable arr marks it's complaining about. Now, if I look at the name of my array, the name of my array is called arr mark. So I think I prefer to call it arr marks. So let me then change that. Let me look at every other instance where I refer to the array. So here it's going to be arr marks. I also realized that I've made a mistake there, and that should have been arr marks I. So each time I input a value from the keyboard, it goes into the different cells of my array. When I is 0, I input a mark and it goes into cell 0 of the array. When the loop goes back up, I plus plus, I becomes 1. I'm inputting another mark and that's going into cell 1 of the array. And that just continues 5 times. Let's check the output. I've said arr marks, so that's correct. And here I've referred to arr marks as well. Let's now give this a run and let's see what we come up with. And I find that there are no errors. So let's give it a test. The first test mark is 50. The second test mark, let's say, is 80. My third test mark is 40. I've lost my connection to the server. That's one of the problems you have when you are using an online compiler. Let's give it a try one more time. And now it seems to work. So we are going to enter mark. Let's go 70 let's go 80, let's go 40, let's go 50, and let's go 90. So those are my 5 test marks, and there we are. That's the output, which is now printing the scores for the 5 test marks. Now that this is working, let's write another segment. And this time round, we will find the sum and the average of all the test marks. Again, I ask myself the question, in order to find the sum of all the test marks, do I need to go to each cell in the array? And the answer again is yes. So I need my for loop, int I equals 0, I less than ARR marks dot length, and it's going to be I plus plus. And I need an accumulator, sum equals sum plus ARR marks, square bracket I. So it takes me to each cell in the array. Now, whenever you use an accumulator, like sum equals sum plus marks, a sum equals sum, that's an accumulator. I'm repeating the variable on both sides of my assignment statement. I have to initialize that accumulator. Well, I have to firstly declare it, and it needs to be initialized. In this case, I'm initializing it to 0. So I've got sum set to 0. The loop is going to execute 5 times. And each time the loop executes, you are going to be accumulating sum. Sum equals sum. It takes the previous value of sum and it adds it to the current value in the array. And remember that because this is a for loop, you have a for loop starting from 0, and it's going to be less than the length, which is 5. We've got the length of the array is 5. So the first value I takes on is 0. So it is working with cell 0 in the array. Then when you go to I plus plus, I becomes 1. You are now working with cell 1 in the array. You go back up, I plus plus, it becomes 2, I becomes 2. You're working with cell 2 in the array. And this continues until you go to 4, I becomes 4. You are now working with cell 4 of the array. When I plus plus goes to 5, this condition fails because I is not less than 5, I is equal to 5. And that is going to stop the for loop. Now, each time that loop executes, it is going to accumulate the marks. It's going to accumulate the marks in the array. And in doing so, it's adding them all up, which is what we want to achieve. Now, when do we work out average? After the loop has finished and it has accumulated all the marks, we now work out the average. So I'm going to say double av equals the sum divided by. Now, what do we divide by? Average is the total sum divided by the number of numbers that we have. So we have to ask ourselves, how many numbers do I have in this array? The array is declared to have 5. This array is declared to have 5 integer values. The cell starts from 0 up to 4, but 0 to 4 means you've got 5 values. So when I'm working out the average, I want to divide it by 5 because I'm working with 5 values. Now, I'm not going to divide by 5. I'm going to divide by ARR marks dot ARR marks, which is the array, dot length. The reason I'm working with, which happens to be 5, please understand that ARR marks.length is equal to 5. Now, why would I want to use ARR marks.length and not use the number 5? Because both would be correct. It's better to use ARR marks.length because if you decide at some stage, if you decide that you want to change the size of your array, so if you decide to change the size of the array and you change it to 10, by changing the size of the array to 10, my average, the formula for the average remains the same. But if I had 5 and I go and change the size of the array, now I have to remember to come and change this value to 10 so that my average is calculated correct. But if I use ARR marks.length, that process is automatically taken care of. So I've worked out my average. The only thing left to do is to display the sum and the average. So I'm going to say the sum of the marks, and I'm going to display the variable sum, which contains the total sum. Similarly, I'm going to say system.out.println the average of the mark, or the average mark is, and I'm now going to display av, which is the variable that stores the average. This is the variable here. So what I'm now doing is I'm first calculating the sum. I first calculate the sum, which takes place here. I calculate the sum. After the loop finishes, I then work out the average. That is being done there. I work out the average. And once I've finished calculating the sum and the average, I then display. Let's give this a quick test. Let's give it a run. And let's input marks. So I'm just going to go 10, 20, 30, 40. Well, it should be 40 and 50. And once that is done, I can see these are my marks, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. That's the display. And I've got a sum of 150, which I know when I add them up is correct. And the average 150 divided by 5 will be 30. So I'm happy with the output that I am getting thus far. The next segment that I want to write is to find the highest. Find the highest mark. So to find the highest mark, the way I am going to solve this particular question, I'm going to create a variable called high, and I'm going to set high to ARR marks 0. So I'm setting it to the first cell in the array. I have a variable called high, and I'm setting it to the first cell in the array. Now I want to start searching from the second cell onwards. So let me start a loop, and this loop int I equals 1. I want to start searching from position 1. So I equals 1, I less than ARR marks dot length, which takes me to the end of the array, I plus plus. And I want to make a check to see if the current value in the array, ARR marks I, if that value in the array is greater than high, which has the first value, and if ARR I is greater than high, then what do you want to do? What do you want to do? You want to set to high the value of ARR marks I. So that means you have now found a new high value that because ARR marks I is greater than high. That means you found another value that's greater than high. And if the value is greater than high, then you take that value and store it into the variable high. It replaces the previous high value. And remember that each time the loop executes, you are looking at ARR marks I. When I is 1, you're looking at cell put at position 1. When I is 2, you're looking at position 2 in the array. And you're constantly comparing it with high. And when you find that value is bigger, you replace that value in the array, and high stores the new value. Notice we don't have an else. And since there's no else, nothing happens if the mark is not greater than high. If that mark is not greater than high, all that happens is the loop goes back up, and then you start looking at the next value in the array if that is greater. And if it's greater, you simply replace it. But if it's not, it goes back up and checks the next value. So at the end of this looping process, we know that this variable high will actually have the highest value. So now I can display that by saying system.out.println the highest mark is, and I print the variable pi. So let's give this a test. I'm going to run this. Enter a mark. So the first mark is 40. The second mark is 90. The third mark is 70. Then the fourth mark is 30. And the last mark is 80. Now, when I press enter, I can see these are all the marks. These are the marks. The sum is 310. The average is 62. And 90 was the highest mark. That was the second mark. So 90 was the highest mark that was input. So these are the segments that you should be very familiar with working with an array. So just to quickly recap, we've got this array, and this array is declaring 5 integers. And then the first segment was where we input the 5 integers, making use of a for loop. And in particular, we used next int to get the input from the user and store it in the array. Thereafter, we did the output. Here is the output. And we used the print statement to keep the cursor on the same line. And note, we used a for loop to go to each cell in the array. And thereafter, the print line is there simply to move the cursor to the next line. After displaying, we went on to find the sum and the average. And we needed an accumulator. And the variable sum was my accumulator that I repeat on both sides. Don't forget to set the accumulator to initialize it. And in this case, we initialized it to 0. And then outside of the loop, we found the average. That's done there. And then once that was calculated, we displayed the sum and the average. So that is how we went about finding sum and average in an array. Finally, we found the highest mark. And to find the highest mark, we first created a variable called high, and we set it to the first cell in the array, to cell number 0, position 0. We then ran a loop from I equals 1, so that when I test the first value, I'm looking at cell 1. I've already got position 0 stored in high. I check cell 1 whether it's greater than high. And when I find a value that's greater than high, I replace high with the new value in the array. I replace high. And as that loop continues checking the different cells in the array, if it's greater than high, I constantly replace the value of high. And when it's finished, I then output the highest value. I hope this helps you in understanding how to work with arrays and how to use the basic techniques of input, output, sum average, and then finding highest. In the next video, we will look at how to do a search, how to do a sort, and to work with more advanced routines with arrays. I hope the video helps. Until the next time, goodbye.